New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Well, hello, it's me, yes, me, Bonnie Gonzalez, your doula for grief. And welcome. If this is your first time joining us, welcome, and just know that you have come to the right place to start your recovery or start on your recovery of this grief journey, recovering from grief. And I am a grief coach. I'm a registered nurse, a religious science practitioner, and also a licensed soul collage facilitator. And I want to say, for those of you that are returning, I am truly honored and just glad to have you back. I want you to just sit back and make this hour your hour. Just listen. If there's a comment or a question that you have, just drop it in the comment box and we'll be glad to address it. And just want to clarify a couple things around grief. That grief is caused by loss. And loss is what we experience, and grief is what we feel. And losses occur in a myriad of ways. Of course, we have death, which I always take my hat off to that. That is the greatest loss of all. I always say that's the mother of all losses. But then we also have a loss of a job, loss of a relationship, lifestyle changes, geographical moves, surgery, health issues, aging, puberty. All of those things are losses. It can lead to that then leads to grief, to your grieving those losses. And grief can just show up in a myriad of emotional ways. There's joy, happiness, sadness. There's that anger, frustration. There's even numbness that can occur as you're grieving. So that's what loss causes. That loss causes grief. That's what grief is all about. Dealing with those losses, dealing from the emotional impact of those losses. So I just applaud you for joining me today, tonight, whenever you're watching this. I applaud you. It takes tremendous courage to acknowledge the issue of grief, to acknowledge what you're feeling, and then taking steps to move through it. And it's definitely not easy. I'm not here to say that, oh, yes, because you've said I'm going to handle my grief today, there you have it. No, the only way to handle grief is just to be with it and to move through it, move through whatever emotional states come up. Whatever emotional states come up, that's what you address. That's what you lean into the feeling. And I always say, and don't do this work alone. Don't do it alone. Bell Hooks says it even better. She says we can't grieve in isolation. and knowing that grief needs to be heard, grief needs to be shared, and grief needs to be validated. So therefore you do need a partner or someone that you can turn to. And if you take a look in your world and you don't see anyone that you can call on to help, reach out for professional help. The help is available. You do not have to do this alone, by no means. And with that said, I've just got such a wonderful guest that is going to share her insights on this very issue. And I want to get my guests on because time goes by so fast. Once we start talking, things always happen really fast here. So I am just so honored and just overjoyed to have Cheryl Pauchuk here today as my guest. Today we are discussing Death Café, and talking about death won't kill you. So Cheryl Pauchuk, our expert on Death Café, is here. So Cheryl is a grief and a mindfulness coach, a Reiki master, and also a spiritual practitioner. And Cheryl says that after 15 years in sales and marketing back in 2003, Cheryl decided to just lean into her intuition. And what happened is that she made a career change. And she says it quite lovely, from focusing, from launching products and brands to what she humorously likes to say as relaunching people by helping them rebrand themselves emotionally, spiritually, and physically. The more clients Cheryl saw, she noticed that she noticed this underlying theme of grief. This insight and curiosity led her to learn more about grief, death, and dying, and her practice evolved to include being a grief recovery method program facilitator, a mindfulness grief coach, and a Death Cafe facilitator, helping people navigate losses and grief. It's the root of so much of our pain and suffering, our stories and beliefs. Cheryl says, to me, it's incredibly sad that we here in the Western world hide from grief, which is a natural emotion as joy, love, and anger. We are so uncomfortable around grief, death, and dying. And it's mostly because we don't have the tools to identify or navigate grief. Isn't that compassionate of Cheryl? Cheryl goes on to say she wants to normalize the conversation around grief and loss, not just from death, but from all areas of life. The more we talk about it, the more natural it gets. Cheryl currently works with her local hospice in Northern Ontario, Canada, and started up a Death Cafe here in Ahihik with plans to expand throughout the Lake Chapala area. She also hosts a private Facebook group, Moment to Moment Living, where she explores mindfulness and grief through the lens of mindfulness. And everyone's welcome to join her Facebook, and we'll give that information a little bit later. But for now, let's get our guests here with us. Help me welcome Cheryl Pauchuk to Your Doula for Grief today. Oh, Cheryl, thank you so much for your yes. Thank you so much. And even a bigger thank you. Thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing. I feel like the more people we have on board with this undertaking, the more successful we can be. So welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. And just for all of you out there, Cheryl and I are in the same city here in Mexico. We're neighbors. I'm in San Antonio and she's in Ahihik. So welcome, neighbor. Yeah, Cheryl, so I would just like to start by asking you, maybe you can share your journey as to what got you involved in grief recovery work. Was it a situation, a aha moment? How did that happen for you?
Well, I think there was a few reasons, but like, you kind of touched on it in my bio, as a life coach and a Reiki master, I do something called Reiki Conversations. So that's, talk therapy while having energetic body work done. And, I was kind of just, not comparing my clients, but just noticing that there was a common thread.
Yes.
That's, keeping us stuck. It's keeping us from moving forward, from living our lives. And it was always grief, not necessarily a death, but death of, a relationship, a career, maybe a financial situation, the whole gamut. And, the more my practice has expanded, I was just, just coming back to this common denominator. And, it just piqued my curiosity. Mindfulness is a huge part of my life.
Yes.
In my studies and my exploration, my curiosity just, kept taking me further and further into, that rabbit hole of service. How can I best serve my community and my clients and even myself? My experience with death growing up was, I think I shared this story with you that I was very fortunate as a young child. I had all four of my grandparents and I had two great grandfathers.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, which is
True.
unusual. So yeah, I was a lucky girl. I have four grandpas. It was awesome growing up. But my mom was all of a sudden going off for this weekend with her sisters, and they were going out Eastern Canada. And I didn't find out years later until they were actually going to bury my great grandfather. And like my parents didn't even tell us that he had died.
Wow.
It was, this was a man that was in our lives and, had relationships and, it's always just stuck with me. That's one of those, childhood situations that shape your personality and mold your thinking and your beliefs and stuff. And, I just, my first true experience with death was with a grandfather, my dad's dad. And again, I was, not living close by and, I was in a different city and, I didn't have any support, I, was far away from my family and didn't really have the tools to process, understand the death or the grieving process that I was even grieving. And it was my first funeral, my grandfather's in a casket, the whole thing. And so just, very impactful on my life. And it's always kind of been an underlying thing with me to just really explore. And, through mindfulness, I've, meditation and being part of the Centers for Spiritual Living as a prayer practitioner, it's just become kind of one of my focuses. But just bringing it back to being in service with my clients, I just, how can I really help my clients navigate what they're, the trauma and the emotions that they've experienced that have led them to me in this, moment in time. So, most of it has really been, just my own healing and expansion and knowledge around death and dying and grief and what's it about, because I wasn't getting any education through school or at home. And, how could I really just best serve my clients? That was really, set me on my journey.
I'm still reeling from your parents taking off and not saying that your grandfather had died. And that brings me to another point that I make to my clients, that we're teaching our children how to grieve. Because who taught you? I mean, when we all sit back and think about, how did I learn to grieve? It has to start with some teaching. Just like we learn to drive a car, we learn to write a check. Somebody helps us with that. So why doesn't it just make sense that we learn how to grieve from those around us? So
Or not grieve.
Exactly. I was going to say, or learn how not to grieve, how to hold it, how to keep it stuffed down. What would you say to your clients, Cheryl, around that, learning to grieve and teaching to grieve?
Well, like I said, and I do my life coaching, my conversations happen on the Reiki table. So I have them just, get very quiet, get very present, and just connect with their body. And, you do a lot of inner child work, and that's, labeled a lot of different things, but that's the part of us that needs the healing. And, and as I'm, doing a body scan and going through and doing Reiki on them, we always find where they're holding their grief. And there's almost always an emotional release.
Yeah.
Maybe not right off the bat, depends on, how stagnant the energy is and how long it's been suppressed and how stuck it is. But it shows up in the body, wherever our weak spots are, anything with, stress or, anger or anything is always, if we're not expressing it. And I love what you said at the beginning is just, we need to learn to know our grief, right? And not to be alone with our grief and all that stuff. But it's to, really just to acknowledge our grief. Man, sometimes for the first time, because, I said, we learn about grief from our environment, from our parents and our teachers. And if nobody's conscious enough to really recognize what grief is, or to, be present with someone while they're grieving, because that's another whole thing, right? We're just so uncomfortable around grief. We can't show up for somebody who is in need of love, and hug, and support, because we get all weirded out, and that's just shouldn't be the case.
Exactly, Cheryl. I so resonate to every word you're saying there. And I was just going to add, though, when you're talking about being in grief and looking around and not having anyone to share it with, I hear that from so many. That they just feel like, well, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to show up as Debbie Downer all the time. Oh, Donnie Downer. Let's make it male and female. Let's not just pick on one gender, but not wanting to show up as someone that's always in a negative space. I think that stems from a little bit of what's the latest term now? Positive toxicity, knowing that is now being displaced. That now it's about feeling your feelings.
Yeah, it's like a spiritual bypass. It's like we need to be so present with our feelings. They're real, right? And we need to process that too. And we don't have those tools or the resources to identify, to acknowledge, and and what do we do with all this stuff, right? And it's and all those labels, like you said, so important what you said, that that we learn how to grieve or not how to grieve from our environment. All those old cliches. It's like, we'll get you another puppy, or you're young enough, you'll get another spouse, or you'll get another job. There's lots of time and there's lots of fish in the sea. But
or get another husband, get another wife. They can do your place. Yeah, they died. I'm sorry, but just get another one.
You've been what, 6 weeks now? Come on, get over it. So those are all these like logical, intelligent things that don't support a shattered heart. Right? When you say those things to a grieving person, they look like you just sprouted antennas and your face turned green. It's just like it doesn't compute. It doesn't offer any support or comfort, and so we're just so awkward around grief and death and dying. That we just spew out these automated, I call it auto-programmed, autopilot responses that we've never even taken the time to really, think about them. Like, is that true? Is that kind? Does that make sense? Does it supportive. Yeah, we just, we're like a little tape recorder. This is like the words come out.
Yeah, and I want to ease into our theme today, but before I go into our theme, just talking about just what you're saying about not having spiritual bypasses, feeling what we need to feel, and so many people are so uncomfortable to be with people that are in grief. Yeah. And I just want to take some of the pressure off by saying, you really don't know the value of just your presence in helping to relieve someone's grief. You really don't have to say anything. You just to be with someone who's in grief. Yeah. And if it helps, and this is a statement, I know that helps. You can always say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. I don't know what to say. I'm sad as well, or that this must be hard. Because we're good at saying, oh, get over it, smart. But those, just to know that you have what it takes, you have an innate ability to sit with someone in discomfort. Yeah. It's just that in our society, we've not been given the opportunity. Yeah. But it's built in. Yes, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you just, one of the women that inspire me is a woman named Yvonne Heath, Canadian in Ontario, Northern Ontario, not in my community, but close. And she's written a book, and she, does a lot of what you do and what I do. And her book and her tagline is just show up.
Oh, I love it.
Show up. Like you said, you don't know. You say, I don't know. I can't even begin to imagine what you're going through. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think it's good to take note of just that phrase alone, because your neighbor might have lost their spouse and you might have lost your spouse, but you didn't have a relationship that they had or with that person that just died. So, there might be similarities, but we never know what that person is going through. So I think one of the best things we can do is just show up. Show up with the lasagna. Show up and cut the lawn. Show up and just go in and water the plants. And I brought over a movie. I'm going to be back at 7. I'm coming with dinner and popcorn and a bottle of wine or whatever. And we're going to watch TV until midnight. We're going to have a pajama party, whatever, right? You know that person to some extent that you can, kind of figure out what they
Oh my gosh, Cheryl, after hearing that, I'm ready. I'm ready. Come on over. I'm ready to pop on over. And I just want to add to that. That is just beautiful. Well said, well said, well said. And I would just offer this as well. When you talk to someone in grief, and we mean this from the bottom of our hearts when we say, I am here. Call me if you need me. Call me if you need me. Well, I'm here to tell you they're not going to call you. They're not going to call you because they're in grief. They're not going to call. And bless your heart for saying that. I offer you instead to say, I am here and I'll be checking in on you. I'll check in on you in 2 days. I'll check in on you over the weekend to see how you're doing. So do know that, yes, as Cheryl has said, we've not been given the tools. And now we're here to give tools, tips and tools. Yeah. On how to support people in grief. And I just thank you for those words, Cheryl. That got me even excited. Like, just go over, water the plants, just do it.
Yeah, just show up, Just
yes.
This,
Yes.
We were having a conversation, I think, at the last Death Cafe, and one of the conversations is, someone was trying to decide, should they show up now at the funeral and stay? It was a family member had lost their partner, or should I wait, kind of until, it's always things get quiet a few weeks after, the celebration, like the funeral, and then show up. And, I said, only the person in those shoes can answer what they need in that moment. And I said, you need to just get them to take their masks off, put their heart on the table, and just, tell them what they need. And I said, you have to realize too that they might not be capable of even really knowing what they want. So you kind of have to gauge that. But, showing up whenever it is, however it is, so important.
just showing up, just showing up. I want to say that I have another group, and we're reading Teach Only Love. It's the 12 Steps of Attitudinal Healing by Cheryl Pauchuk. I don't know if you've heard of it or know it, but it's great. But he goes through this litany of things. It's about teach only love. And he goes through this litany of fears, fear of loss of relationship, loss of home. He has all these fears that he goes through that we suffer with these different fears. And he says at the bottom of all of these fears, the underlying root is fear of death, the fear of death. And that's why I thought this could move us into Death Cafe. If we could get to the root of the fear, then we can rip that out and start to rejuvenate and revive. So Death Cafe, I love that tagline, talking about it won't kill you. Yeah. Tell me how you got involved. What showed up?
Well, actually what showed up for me was grocery shopping. This was back in 2017, I think. And they had a little poster, because I'm in a very small community, so all our information is little posters, flyers. And they said there was a focus group with, community hospice, day and time and location. And I'm like, oh my God, that's starting in like 10 minutes. And having a marketing background, stuff like that always piques my interest. So I was just around the corner. I went over, and they were actually having a focus group on just gauging the interest to have death cafes in our community. And I'd never even heard of a death cafe. But as I sat there, I'm like, oh my God, this is like, the light bulbs were going. My heart was beating. I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. This is what we need. So by the end of the focus group, I had signed up to be their main facilitator in my little corner of the community. And it's whatever you need, I'm like all over this. And so we launched them and got them going, and then COVID hit. So we were kind of shuffling, trying to figure out what we were going to do. So we just kind of laid low for a little bit, and then we just moved to Zoom, and now we're back doing them in person again throughout our community. So, oh my gosh, sorry, I thought I turned my phone off.
Okay. You're popular. Everybody wants your energy right now, Sherry. You're on fire there.
So sorry. Oh my God.
It's all good. It'll stop at some point.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure they're not going to call back, though. So.
Yeah, sometimes they don't take no for an answer. They're persistent.
That's absolutely right.
Let me ask you this, Cheryl. What do you say to people that say, oh, that sounds so morbid, when you say, oh, Death Cafe? Do you get that? Because I get that quite a bit about, oh, Death Cafe. That is so morbid.
Okay. And I always say, you know what? I said, you might have that reaction. I said, but come, I promise you, it will be the most interesting conversation you've had ever. And they're like, oh, okay.
Yes. I was going to say, I'm almost tempted to say, oh, come, just so you can tell us what make it more morbid. If it wasn't morbid enough, come, be a part of it.
Yeah. And there's free cake and coffee. Our community, we provide the cake and coffee. That was John Underwood, who actually started the death cafes. That was kind of his thing, is, there's that fear, if you start talking about death, you kind of invite it into the room.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
So having cake and tea, because it was started in England, I'm kind of just, neutralizes cancels that thought out. So it just makes it a little more socially acceptable when there's tea and cake. So that's how that kind of concept came into be, which, is kind of how we do that, is through, offering tea and cake.
Right.
I know one of our death cafes, we were kind of just coming back after COVID. So I bought little tiny muffins. So, you're not everybody's touching the same loaf.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, all the COVID precautions.
pre-made tea so people could just pick up a glass. And I actually got in trouble because there was no cake, because we had
my goodness.
cupcake or muffins. They were not the same.
Oh, it's not cake. Excuse me. And I was going to say, what's the attendance like? Has it grown? Has it gotten smaller? I know COVID kind of wreaked a little havoc on your Death Cafe.
Yeah. So we started off, we were probably about 20 to 25 people.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of were around 10 when, I'd say 10 to 15 on Zoom.
Right.
And, and I've been away all winter, so I'm just coming back. We've got one actually next week in our community. So
yes.
I don't look after the signups, but I think we've got probably about 10, 15 people signed up already to join us. So yeah, so I think, like I said, I'm in a pretty small community. So in the winter, we don't have as many people show up just because the weather's usually bad.
Yes,
But,
roughly.
yeah, but we're enough to break into small groups and have a good conversation.
Yeah, I got introduced to Death Cafe during the pandemic in Ireland. We were living in Ireland in the countryside, and everything was shut down. And I lived online like most people in my little cubicle on Zoom. And I just happened to see a Death Cafe that was being offered in London. And it was online, and it was well attended. I really appreciate it, having found it. And because it's just, I always say grief is my jam. So anything talking about death, grief, and dying, I'm there. But it was just quite interesting. Well, I will ask you, and I won't give anything away. I'll ask you, how are your death cafes facilitated? What happens at a death cafe beside our tea and our coffee?
Yeah, so we pretty much follow. There's a website, deathcafe.com, and it's full of all kinds of information, and you can download documents on how to host your own death cafe and get one started in your community. You can actually even go to the website and post your events there, and so people in your community have that information. But ours, we always kind of start off, like I say, we kind of follow the guidelines. We kind of create that sacred space of just letting people know, and that's important too, to pick a space that's easily accessible. It's got good parking. Make sure you can facilitate, people that might be in wheelchairs or walkers, that kind of thing. And then there's privacy. I think that's super important. And we just kind of really set the tone that what happens in this room stays in this room. We've had media show up, and we've told them that they're not allowed to come in. Actually, once we let them actually come in, we pulled the people in the room, just and some people were okay with it, some people weren't. So we kind of just worked out, for them to take a picture just for a little news story. But typically we don't let any media in, just to keep the space sacred. And, we just kind of lay the groundwork for what's about to happen. We share a little bit about the history. John Underwood, as I said, started them in 2011, which was actually a spin-off on something called Cafe Morte from what's his name? Bernard, I forget his name. It's on the website, but he was a sociologist and historian, a few other things, but he'd lost his spouse, I think in the late 1990s, and had started what he called in French, Cafe Morte, just because he wanted to be around people and he wanted to talk about death. And
it was his grief process that started it then.
So it was kind of, that's where the seed, was planted and got watered. And John Underwood had somehow connected with this fellow. And, you read anything about John Underwood, he just seemed like a man with a huge heart, just of service. And he just saw the need for this in community so much that he was the one who created this death cafe. John actually tragically died in 2017. He's very young. He was just 44.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Mom and his sister have taken on, mom was always working with him, but so they've kept up with the website and keeping the death cafes going. And yeah, so interesting story, and it's all on the website, but so we kind of share a little bit of the history, and then we set the ground rules. So the ground rules are that, one, this is not a grief support group.
Yes, I just wanted to make that really clear. Right.
Yeah, and that we kind of start talking off together, and then depending on how many people come in, we go into smaller groups, 4 to 6 people, just so we can have better, deeper conversations, and everybody has a chance to talk and share. And we emphasize that, some people are slower to talk or more quiet, and some people just, so just to be cognizant of, how much you're, taking the floor space, because we want everybody to have a turn to share and weigh in or ask a question or whatever's going on. And then we meet for 90 minutes, half hour, that we split up 15 minutes at the beginning and 15 minutes at the end as a group. So we're together for about an hour. And at the end, we kind of give everybody 5 minutes to kind of warning bell to wrap up their conversations. And then we come back together as a group. And every group kind of just shares a little bit what happened in their group. And like I said, you'll never have a more interesting conversation. It's like anything and anything, is open for discussion. As long as it's kind of under that death and dying umbrella. And the youngest person I ever had show up was 19, and they actually left their shift at their, they were working at McDonald's or one of the fast food places. They actually left their shift early to come join the conversation. And awesome. Which I thought was so amazing. And she was I felt for her, because her parents were a lot like mine. It's like, you don't talk about death or dying.
Yes.
And the oldest person we ever had so far was 94. And she said, I never even thought one day about death or dying. She said, but I saw your poster and I saw free cake and tea. So she said, what the heck? I'm going to come.
What do I have to lose at 94?
Yeah. So that's kind of how we set up our death cafes.
Right. I was going to say 2 things that I really want to say about Death Cafe. Well, 3 things, I guess. It's really not grief support. It's really not grief support. It's not even death and dying. It's about your own death. And that's what I'd like to make clear to people. Someone said to me, oh, this is great. Yeah, we all need to get comfortable with death and dying. And it's like, well, I'll take it one step further. Number 1, we need to have an understanding, or what do we believe is death? Our own death, our own personalizing death. Because I hope this doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. One day you're going to die. So what do you, and that's what I love about Death Cafe. The other thing is that I really, it would just make my heart happy to really go out and promote this to young people, because that's when it starts. That's the vital part. That's the vital part. The younger you are, that you can come to some understanding what you feel about death, your own death. I think the more, oh my gosh, the freedom you bring to your own life. Yeah. And it's really about freeing yourself up from that shadow, as this Cheryl Pauchuk goes on to say, how it permeates all parts of your life. It's like this water that just spreads out, the kind of blanket of snow, per se, that covers everything when you're afraid to really examine your own ideas of death. But then on the other hand, so many people leave feeling so light, so free from, I'm jumping around here. I was going to ask you, because what's your favorite question to ask when you're facilitating with your group? What's your favorite question?
One of my favorite questions is, because we gear a lot of our conversation, and our conversations aren't scripted. There's no agenda with the Death Cafe. We have actually made up a bunch of cards questions. So if there's a stall in the conversation, or, you just want to, throw in another topic, each group is invited to pick a card. But I love the legacy stuff. And, I think the more we kind of think about our death and what we want and how we see our end of life, or, where do we want to be? Do we want to be at home, the hospital, making all those decisions. I think that's such a great process to go through, because it helps normalize our death, right? Like you said, death is all about, it's fear, because there's so much mystery. We don't really know what happens on the other side. We've got people that have died and come back, and we've got religion, we've got, spirituality, and there's a whole gamut, but, until we actually have that experience, we don't really know. Right. So there's always that big mystery there, but I think, we're control freaks. And I think the more that we can be organized and in control of our death, I think it takes the fear away to some degree.
Yes.
You said it opens us up to say, okay, I've laid out what I want. Everybody knows what I want. I've got my binder, and I've had the talk with my spouse or my kids or, whoever. But I always love taking people through the real personal questions. Like, who do you want to leave your favorite joke to? Who's going to carry the legacy of your, telling jokes, or, whatever it is that you're kind of known for? Who's going to, take on the shortbread recipe?
Yes, who's going to get
those are the things that you hold near and dear to your heart. Like, who do you want those to go to? So those are the fun questions I like to throw out, because it kind of just, it's like, oh yeah, it's like I've been the jokester in the family, my whole life. It's like, I'm not here. Who do I want? I can assign this job to somebody and just make it fun, right? Or, who's going to show up with a tin of Christmas cookies, next?
Oh my gosh.
Lots of secret recipes.
Oh my gosh, Cheryl. I just love it, because it brings such a sense of lightness to a subject that we feel is so gloom and and it's really not. It's really not heaviness. What we're doing is dispelling the fear and pulling back the veil of mystery on it. For me, what I've gotten out of it, I think I did this, it was a death workshop that I done some years ago, but it was one of those that the question was asked, how would you like to die? And before that, I had really never thought about it. How would I like to die? And I created the scene of how I would like to die. And it was so like, oh my gosh, outdoors with my family and friends around. And we're almost having like a little kind of a picnic. And it's just so light and fun. And that's what I'd like my own death to be, this lightness of spirit. Yeah. And for me, it helped me identify the part of death that had a sense of heaviness. I'll put it that way. And it was like, wow, I just don't want my family to be so sad. That was the only regret around death that I could the conclusion I could come to from this event. But even that got dispelled and put in place. It was some years later, I had a dream about the whole death and dying and my family being sad. And the dream, it was like, oh, we all know we have to go. It's okay. It's okay to go. So for me, that was answering my own question about death, allowing me to be comfortable with my own death. And us, Cheryl, myself, and all the psychologists and coaches and counselors, what I say is that we're the first responders. You know how you have first responders who go out, there's an accident, and they get the person to the hospital and get them taken care of. And I say that we are the spiritual first responders. We are the spiritual first responders. And the more I can be at peace with the idea of death, my own death, the more I can be at peace and be more available and freed up to really assist someone else in their grief recovery.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's like that with anything. The more that we have the awareness, the acknowledgement, the consciousness, the understanding, we've done our own work and we're grounded in that, then we show up in full service to someone who's in need. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter what's going on. We can be fully present and, as we said before, and just show up, right? Just to be there for them.
Yes, yes. And I was going to add that line about, yes, and we are all in this together. The more I can help you, the more you can help someone else. And it's the gift that just keeps on giving.
Yeah. And the Death Cafe, and it's, I always find it so interesting that it's, when you set up that sacred space for facilitating a death cafe, it just, the conversations that happen, because people feel safe and they know it's they can talk and ask questions or explore, those thoughts or whatever. And, we always say, we're really just normalizing the conversation. So it's, we kind of have these conversations with strangers and we kind of work it out in our head and talk to, people in our group. And then you can go home and have these conversations with your loved ones. You're like, this is what I think about death and dying, like my dying. And this is what I want. This is, how I would like my end of life to be. And I might not be in a position to, orchestrate this, but, I've got my binder here, or here's a file on my computer or my, USB or, tools we use these days. But make sure someone near and dear to your heart knows where that information is and that you go through it with them. And I think that's another really big, important thing. Like, circling back to my parents have planned, their funeral, everything's paid for, we just go and sign the paper and we don't have to do anything else. God bless them. But we're like, well, where's this? But they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. It's like, okay, well, at least we know where the binder is. Let's get the key until they're actually dead. So, which, I have to respect my parents, but at the same time, they're not making it easier for them and their own death, nor for the people that are going to be grieving once they die, right? And I think that's so important. And that's, I think the key importance of a death cafe is just to, get clarity, to get understanding, to get organized, and to normalize it. Like, this is just a normal conversation. This is like, figuring out what, where we're going to go on vacation, or family conversation that might be happening at the dinner table.
Yes. Going on the big vacation.
Right. But
I love that.
It needs to happen.
Yes. And I can speak from experience, because my mom, before she made her transition, it's been about 7 years ago, she wanted somebody to come and write down her wishes. She wanted us to know what colored flowers she wanted on her coffin, what dress she wanted, who was going to give her eulogy, and blah, 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 and what she wanted said. And no one in the family wanted to. They kept, let's talk about that later. But I said, okay, just tell me what you want, and wrote it all down. And when that time came, everyone was so happy in the family to know that they were honoring what she wanted. This was her last request. So with that's enough to free you up to say, yes, I'll go, so that I can just let someone know, so that they feel a sense of, wow, yes, a sense of that they were able to honor the wishes. I was going to ask if, has there ever been a time that there was a not so favorable response to Death Cafe? Ever had anybody that didn't have a favorable response?
I think it's been more in a lack of understanding what a Death Cafe is about. As we said earlier, they're not grief support groups.
Oh, yes.
We have people that show up thinking, on in a circle and, share our woe is me's thing, which I'm all in favor of. They have their time and their place. I think they're great for our healing journey. But a death cafe is not about that. So, but they've always stayed and they've always enjoyed the conversation and you know, made it clear that that was not really what they were looking for. So that's why I like to say up front, you know, this is what it's about. This is what it's not. Just so there's no surprises when people show up.
Yes, especially.
Yeah. And the other thing, which I didn't mention those when we're kind of setting the ground rules, is that we always tell everybody that, you know, you're going to probably be triggered if you're bringing up something that's been weighing heavy on your heart or your mind, and to never, ever, ever leave a death cafe upset.
Oh, good.
And to come to the facilitator. You know, we try and have a few facilitators. I know you co-facilitate with us in Ahihik, just so we've kind of got one at every table, or at least, you know, one facilitator kind of overseeing a couple of groups at the same time, just so we can kind of, you know, again, add to that sacred, safe space. And they know that if, you know, we got them, if something's going to trigger them, that they're not going to leave at the end of the death cafe upset or triggered, or, you know, not grateful as they walked in.
No, I found it to be that people leave really in a good space, mentally in a good space, and looking forward to coming back. I've never heard, oh, this is, and lots of laughter goes on, lots of laughter and sharing of jokes. It's just a great, it's a great environment to be in. And I think you said something about setting that sacred space. It is amazing what will come up when people are allowed to express a deep held fear, resistance. It's wonderful to just watch that unfold, how people suddenly feel freed up to share something that they felt was maybe taboo, even if you want to use that word. Or as you say, if I talk about death, I'm calling it in that kind of thing. So I just appreciate that to no end.
Yeah.
So
and like you did with, you know, getting normalizing this conversation with the youth, the younger generation, parents and teachers and, you know, community leaders, to normalize this conversation. So kids grow up thinking that talking about death is normal.
That it's just the way it is, that you grow up talking about everything else, about shoe size, bra size, whatever. You can bring death into the equation as well. So I know that you're going to be headed back to Toronto, Ontario, the weekend. So what's happening when you get back? Where can we find you? What are you doing? How can we be a part of Cheryl's world?
Well, the best way to reach out to me is my email address is there. If anybody's interested in having a death cafe, you want to have a conversation about how to start one in your community, I invite that conversation. I also host a private Facebook group. It's called Moment to Moment Living, which is really mindfulness, but I have a special focus, not every day, but we do talk about grief in a very mindful perspective. I do mindfulness grief workshops as well as the grief recovery workshops. So, you know, those will be starting up when I get back home. We've got a death cafe scheduled for next Wednesday. And then the following week, we jump into our 8-week grief recovery program. So, yeah, but anybody who's interested in staying in touch, love to hear from anybody. And yeah, we're here for you to keep the conversation going.
Oh, boy, Cheryl, just delightful. And please reach out. You'll be in good hands. Cheryl's there with Death Cafe and doing her Reiki. I love you. What did you call that? Reiki
conversations?
Reiki conversations. And that is, explain that just a little bit more.
So that's my combination of taking talk therapy on the table. So I said we will go in and we do that inner child work while you're having Reiki. And I do something called sound Reiki. So it's the jackhammer effect of going in there and loosening up stuck energy that just brings, whatever, you've been deeply suppressed to the surface. And 9 times out of 10, it's grief. And so we deal with that, feeling the body energetically, and just helping you, like I said, relaunch that programming and that thinking, and just put you in a new happy place to navigate and be with that loss.
I love the idea of sound. Do you use bowls, drumming, tuning?
No, actually, the client sounds. It's their own vibration, their own voice.
Toning.
So it's an indigenous healing tool that I was taught from my Reiki master. So it's a powerful hour.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you've got tools that can be used, and one can take those tools back and continue their own work, and maybe tune to Cheryl for a tune-up. a tune-up, a tone-up.
Yeah, tune-up, whatever. But it's, and I always invite in prayer as a prayer practitioner. If clients, open to prayer, I will always start and end a session with prayer, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm also a Kundalini yoga instructor, so I do meditation through Kundalini yoga, but I do a lot of breath work. So it just when the body is opening up, just how to breathe in that calm and that peace, and just have those tools to navigate grief when you're having that day when you just want to stay in bed and pull the covers over your head, or you're out in public. So you just have some little simple tools that help you get through those situations.
Something that you can grab hold of, like a lifeline to get you through.
Yeah, and they're all tools we take. They're just with us. We have them with us all the time.
Wow, Cheryl. Oh, you're just absolutely wonderful, delightful, informative, insightful guest. I just thank you so much. And thank you for bringing Death Cafe down here to Ahihi. And we will mind it until you come back. And we'll make sure that it continues to flourish in your absence, and can't wait for you to come back. And I just thank you. And you're always welcome to come back onto Your Doula for Grief and share any other tools, tips, and tricks of the trade of grief. That's so welcomed here. So I thank you. And you'll be back in Canada first, we'll say 1st of April. 1st of April. She'll be on the scene, and do send an email and reach out. So thank you. And I just want to thank everyone for listening. And check it out, Death Cafe. And I know we're here in Mexico, but I know that there are online, you can check online for Death Cafe and find one near you, or better yet, start one. If you can't find one and you're interested, start a Death Cafe. Get that cake and coffee. Is it cake that you guys provide? Yes, get those treats out and bring that sense of lightness to the subject. Let's shed that cloak of dark and mysterious and heaviness that goes with death. So I am going to close our time here together and just say thank you. And I am also a grief coach, and you have my information. Reach out. Just don't do death alone. Don't do death, dying, grieving. Just don't do this grief alone. So I'm going to leave you with a question for today. It's just, take a deep breath. Go within. Feel what's in your body. Feel what's in your heart. And just ask yourself, what do I need today? What do I need today? And whatever that answer is, honor it. Honor it. Know that you are so worthy of honoring your own needs. And with that, I say thank you. And I'll see you next week. Until then, hasta luego. Ciao, ciao.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network, come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.